The real measurement of a government is a government that does not do harm to its own people. There are so many young people who've given up. I want Territorians to aspire. I want Territorians to shoot for the stars. And I don't want government standing in the way.
All right. Shane Stone, thanks for joining us on the Next Gen North podcast.
Pleased to be here.
You've been sort of in and out of the political spotlight a little bit since your time as Chief Minister in the late 1990s. What's been keeping you busy since those days, Shane?
Well, I had a very rewarding political career. I did 3 terms in the Territory Parliament and retired undefeated. But I only had that opportunity because of the Country Liberal Party and my earlier work in Conservative politics interstate.
Right.
So I felt that people like me, we really needed to still contribute where we could. And so in the intervening period, I have been actively engaged off and on with the Country Liberal Party in the Northern Territory, which I'll call the CLP.
Okay.
And with the Liberals, both interstate and particularly federally. I mean, I served 6 years as the federal president of the Liberal Party.
Yep.
And that was riding along with John Howard, which was one of the most exhilarating times in Australian politics. But I actually started in the Country Party in Victoria when I was a youngster, 16, 17.
Yep.
And the first serious politician that I engaged with was Black Jack McEwen.
Right. John
McEwen, the former, went on to become a Prime Minister briefly after Harold Holt drowned. And but the Country Party was very much in the country, and I'd been in the country. I was a teacher in the country. And when I came up to Melbourne, or down to Melbourne I should say, I made the transition to the Liberal Party.
Right. So I think that's a good segue into your roots. Where are you actually from originally?
I was born in Bendigo, but I grew up in Wodonga.
Okay.
And my dad was a school teacher who went on to become principal of Wodonga West. And I maintain a family website called The Stone Family in Australia, and all the detail is there. But Dad went on to be elected to the Wodonga Shire Council, which later became the rural city of Wodonga, and became mayor. And 10 years after he died, Mum did the same thing.
Right. So was that like a family influence then, do you think, that really sort of stoked that fire to get you into politics?
Yeah,
or?
My parents were a great inspiration to me. They were always giving to the community, and you've got to understand the setting. I grew up on a housing commission estate, in a housing commission house.
Interesting.
And went to local state schools. I mean, I'm a rock solid working class product,
right?
But I never embraced the Labor Party, not ever. And I'm somewhat, I listened to the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, talk about how he grew up in social housing. Well, I don't think that's quite the same as Housing Commission.
Right.
We lived in these tiny little dog boxes, which were built by the Housing Commission of Victoria.
Yep.
You rented them, and then they decided you could buy them. And my parents were as poor as church mice, and they did ultimately manage to buy their Housing Commission house.
Right. So do you see there being a strong role for the state in providing housing to the community?
Absolutely.
Right.
Yes, I'm a big advocate for bring back the Housing Commission.
Okay.
Give people a start. Invariably, I go back to Wodonga from time to time. Mum died last year, so excuse me. Mum died last year, but I was regularly going down to see her. And I drive around that Housing Commission area now, which is made up of still the tiny little houses, but they're now in private hands.
Yep.
And they've got well-kept gardens, and they belong to people who've made that home.
Yep.
And it's a subsidised way into the market. I mean, I think one of the greatest challenges in Australia today is that there are so many young people who've given up on the thought of owning their own home. Well, I say to those people, do not give up. You know, I know it's hard, and you've got two classes of Australians. You've got them that have got them and them that don't.
Yep.
And we need to make sure we reach out to those people who don't have home ownership and help them get there, like we've been helped.
Yep. So is the CLP providing those options come August? Should it win government? What's the CLP promising or hoping to do with housing?
Well, there's a number of things we'll be doing, and I'm not going to preempt our parliamentary leader, Leah Finocchiaro, is doing a great job.
Yep.
But the first lot of measures that came through were around first home buyers grant, but we took it a step further.
Yep.
And it was called I think it was called a fresh start. So, you know, you could be someone who came from interstate, so I don't qualify for first home. That's all right, fresh start.
Yep.
There's a grant there for you too. We want people to come to the Territory, we want people to put down roots, want people to stay. I mean, at the moment we have an outflowing of the population, which is just heartbreaking, because this impacts everything. It impacts how much we get in GST payments. It impacts the productivity around our commercial sector, whether you're down at Coolangatta or out at Casuarina. You know, the people aren't there. I mean, in 2 lots of polling, we picked up that 1/3 of Territorians want to leave. 1/3.
Yep.
And the tragedy is many of them can't, because the value of their properties here have been so degraded by poor government over 20 years that even if they got something for their home or apartment, they can't buy in on the East Coast.
Or you're in negative equity.
You're way behind.
Yeah, you're in negative equity.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's just, and look, for some people, and I'm in that group, I did buy a place in Brisbane when my kids went to boarding school. It wasn't a case of me being some genius property investor.
Yeah.
More, it was an accidental purchase which just multiplied over the years without me having to do anything. And that's what people are up against.
Yeah.
And that's why the bank of mum and dad, which now runs the trillions, is so important for so many young Australians. But not everyone has got a mum and dad who has the capacity to help them with that deposit and get them on their way.
Yep. So when I hear, you know, the government, well, the CLP potentially offering $50,000 for new builds and that sort of thing, I get a little bit concerned about that $50K being priced into the market and overheating it further. Is there any concerns in that respect about that?
Look, we did discuss that. It's an inevitable discussion to have, saying, well, you put the 50 out there, does it really benefit the first home buyer?
Yep.
Or does it just get passed on to the developer who jack their prices?
Yep.
What this means is we have to be very vigilant with those in the private sector to make sure that they're playing the game. And look, if they're smart, they will.
Yep.
Because people who buy their first home, get established, well, it's only a matter of time before they will want to, move on and get another home up here, something a bit better, and who are they going to look to? They're going to look to the home builder who played fair with them.
Right.
So look, we're aware of it.
Yep.
But what's the alternative? You do nothing. And I don't think that is an alternative. You can't allow yourself to reach a position where you say, well, do nothing.
Yep.
No, not good enough.
Right. We've raced a little bit quickly into the political stuff, which I hadn't anticipated. But so I'd like to just circle back and talk about Shane Stone a bit more for a second. So you're in Wodonga. What was your sort of first profession before, you know, entering into politics? Did you do something different, or were you always a
I sure did. I joined the army.
Oh, right. Wow. So tell us about that.
Well, I was only 17 thereabouts, but I joined the army and I wasn't there long. But having said that, I maintained over 40 years reserve service after I came out of the Army.
Wow.
So that was an important thing for me to do. But I went from Army to train as a teacher.
Oh, right.
So I was a primary school teacher. I did that for 5 years.
Yep.
And I did postgrad studies in education. I'm very committed to staying in the profession.
Yep.
But I always had this sense of wanting to be a lawyer. And so I abandoned my teaching career. I was 24 at the time.
Okay.
And I got into one of these programs for mature age students where their initial interview they say, well, we don't think you can ever do this, but we'll give you a go. And it was a time of no university fees.
Okay.
So if you were prepared to roll the dice and they were prepared to fill their quotas with people who they essentially thought were not very prospective.
Yeah.
So I went off to ANU in Canberra.
Okay.
And I did exceptionally well. And that's where I met my wife, Josephine. We've been married for 46 years.
Yep.
And we, after 2 years, we transferred to Melbourne because from my teaching days, I had a little apartment down there. So we had somewhere to go and hang our hat.
Yep.
And that was an important consideration. But what's really interesting, I was a very poor student at school. I was woeful.
Okay.
I was no good at exams. I got what's called a compensatory pass in matriculation. And I only just managed to scrape over the line. I remember the teachers telling my father that they thought I could make a carpenter perhaps, which I thought, well, that's all right. I mean, there's been some pretty impressive world figures who've been carpenters.
Yeah, I can think of one. Yeah.
And the remarkable thing was when I got into university, I discovered I could write.
Right.
And I have a string of high distinctions in university exhibitions from my university studies, which stands absolute contrast
Right.
to my performance at school.
Interesting. So does that, you said you weren't very good at school, but then you became a teacher as well. So does that sort of conform to the old adage, if you can't teach? Is that sort of, does that resonate with you at all?
Well,
not knocking our teachers.
No, not knocking teachers. My father was a teacher. I was a teacher.
Yeah.
But the reality was back then, the last port of call was the primary school teachers' colleges basically took anyone.
Right.
And so I went in and away I went. But again, it was these exams and I didn't do particularly well. I did very badly, in fact.
Yeah.
But once I got into university, I mean, I subsequently graduated from 4 universities.
Wow.
So, it's... in fact, for a while there, I was being asked or encouraged at ANU because my results were so good in the sociology anthropology area that a fellow by the name of Professor Zubrinsky really worked on me to forget this law stuff, stick with sociology,
Right.
do a PhD. And I remember saying to him, and what do I do then? Because I'm not sure there were many jobs out there for sociologists.
Yeah.
Anyway, I stuck with the law.
Yep.
And when I graduated from law, it was down in Melbourne, and I did a stint as associate to Sir Edward Woodward in the Federal Court.
Okay.
And then I went to the Victorian Bar, and I made a good living. But I became part of a cohort of young barristers who, under the encouragement of a fellow called Frank Vincent, who subsequently served on the Supreme Court in Victoria, telling us that we should all go and spend some time working with Aboriginal legal aid.
Right.
And I mean, they're mostly Labor people, but I thought, actually, this is a worthwhile thing to do.
Yep.
And I did 3 or 4 different tours of duty into the top end. I spent some time as the director of the Katherine Aboriginal Legal Aid Service. I got a wealth of experience, which is one of the things about the Territory. I mean, whether you come up here as a lawyer, a doctor, an engineer, you get chucked in the deep end, and I mean the deep end.
Yep.
And
sink or swim.
well, so much so for your clients too. But I was doing far more serious matters in the Territory than I could ever get briefed for in Victoria. Anyway, I was spending time back and forth, and I met Paul Everingham, and he knew I was not getting a gig with the Liberal Party in Victoria. Apparently I was in the wrong group or whatever, which was news to me, but it turned out to be true. And Paul said in that laconic Queensland drawl, come to the Northern Territory, you can be anything you want to be in the Territory. Now, that is absolutely right. I, with all the stints in Aboriginal legal aid, I ultimately moved with Josephine, we didn't have any children at this point, to Alice Springs. Right. And we were there for a bit over 3 years. And within 12 months, I was the vice president of the CLP.
What year was that, sorry?
That was about 1987, 86, 87.
Okay.
And then I had a crack at a seat in Alice Springs called what was called Saturday, and was held by a chap called Dennis Collins. And he was the sitting CLP member, and they dumped him for me. And he then had the temerity to absolutely thrash me. So that was that was quite an experience. And but shortly after that, I was elected president of the CLP.
Right.
And we decided to make the move to Darwin. We got here in '89, and in 1990, I stood for the seat of Port Darwin, won it. Tom Harris retired so I could have a go, and went straight into the ministry. Marshall Perrin graciously appointed me a minister straight up. I never spent any time on the backbench. Right. And 5 years later, I was Chief Minister of the Northern Territory. Now, I listen to Paul Everingham. You can be anything you want to be in the Territory. It is so true. Less so today. Okay. I think that there are inhibitors to what you can do today, which is tragic. The Territory was always, should be, the last frontier where people can have a swing. And no one's going to ask you where you came from. No one's going to ask you what your real name might be. I had some funny moments as a lawyer. So who are you? Who wants to know? But work hard and have a go, have a swing, and that was the measure.
Yep.
And you got there. And, I mean, in 95, Chief Minister, 97, I won that general election. It was the biggest result the CLP's ever had in two-party preferred.
Yep.
And I look back on it and I thought, wow, it's a roller coaster. But you see this story repeated over and over again in the Northern Territory, where people might come up as a tradie operating out of the back of their ute, and before you know it, they've got a thriving business. And it's just the way this place used to be and could still be like that.
So when you say inhibitors, is that something that's been done deliberately? Is it just an effect of growing as a territory, population-wise, or the size of government getting too big? What do you put that down to?
I put down to two things. The first is that Labor governments can't help themselves. They want to introduce every measure they've ever seen interstate.
Okay.
And you see it across a whole raft of things here in the Territory now.
Yep.
You can't do this, you can't do that. Why can't you do that? Oh, there's uniform standards. We went to a ministerial council meeting and we all signed up to the... I mean, we were famous for not signing up to things.
Right.
Right? There's a reason, we don't have fishing licences. There's a reason we don't have boat licences. I mean, we push back on all this. Hey, we got fireworks. You know, who else has got fireworks?
Yeah.
We just drew a line in the sand. Now, Labor hasn't had the courage to close a lot of this stuff down, but true to form, would like to, because they want to make us like the rest of Australia. And since I've come back in as CLP president, third time, for the purpose of this election,
Yep.
meeting with a lot of business people, a lot of tradies, a lot of ordinary folks who say this is being foisted on us, you know, and whether it's traffic controllers right through to, you know, main trades like plumbing and electricity and I mean, it's just mind-boggling. And it's an incremental creep. You know, people don't realise that it's been introduced
Yep.
until all of a sudden it impacts them. So there has been this propensity of Labor governments, and they've done it everywhere.
Yep.
You know, they've done the same in Queensland. And I hope that David Crisafulli will have the courage to do an audit, go through and say, well, we don't do that anymore, we don't do that, we don't need to do that. And that's not about compromising safety or standards. It's about getting government out of your life.
Yep.
I mean, it shouldn't be the case that every time you turn around, you're looking at some government regulation or some bureaucrat who's enforcing what they're obliged to enforce, saying, well, that's the law now.
Yep.
So, you know, I hanker a bit after the old territory, realising we won't get back to those Hallican days of it really was a last frontier. But we can certainly get rid of a lot of the stuff that goes on and comes out of government and tangles your life up.
So you say Labor wants to make us like the rest of the rest of Australia. What's the motivation behind that? You know, why would you want to make us the same as everyone else? Is it easier to govern if you just copying someone else's playbook, or what's the motivation there in your mind?
Anyone who's made a study of the way that Labor governs will recognise the fact that they're micromanagers. They got their fingers in everything,
Right.
and they just want all Australians to be the same. I mean, I never joined the Labor Party. I would have been dead set candidate for the Labor Party. Working class, housing commission, state schools. They don't support aspiration.
So is that why you diverge from that path, perhaps?
Absolutely. I mean, they want Australians all be the same. They want Australians to conform. They believe that the state, as in the system, should be able to just step in and basically take over all your needs if required.
Yep.
I mean, you see it on a lot of, you know, programs and strategies that are in play. And I mean, there's a lot of people like me, we saw Labor firsthand as young people, and, you know, I believe in aspiration. I want Territorians to aspire. I want Territorians to shoot for the stars, and I don't want government standing in the way.
So is this sort of over-regulated, over-legislated environment, is that just a way for politicians to justify their paychecks in a sense? That, you know, we've passed all this legislation, whether or not it's the right legislation, is that just a way for politicians to justify their positions in society?
No, I don't think so. I think they just go with the flow.
Okay.
You know, the system, the bureaucrats they'll come back from meetings in Canberra or wherever and say, oh, well, look, everyone's doing this and perhaps we should consider doing this if we did this. And federal government throws incentives your way as well. If you sign up to this, then we will reward that behaviour. You see it in education.
Right.
I mean, as a former education minister, I mean, they're always trying to bribe us, whoever it was that was in government.
Yep.
You know, cross party lines. You know.
Sure.
Fit in, and the paycheck's on the way.
Yep.
It's irresistible unless you say no. You know, we don't do that. So it's and you can't unravel all this overnight. You know, it's going to take a long march.
Yep.
To actually have a close look at the programs, not the people,
Yep.
the programs.
So is that the CLP's platform this time? It's not to just win government for 4 years, it's to win government, stay in for the long journey and build long term?
Well, of course, every political party would say that you're not going to achieve much in the first term. And in defence of Leah, I say, don't expect everything to change overnight. It doesn't. Mm-hmm. I mean, as someone who's been a chief minister, you know, you will listen to the arguments for and against.
Yep.
You don't just ride roughshod over your bureaucrats who are doing their very best to give you what they think is the way forward.
Yep.
And you should give careful consideration to what you do next. Mm-hmm. I mean, I had some brilliant ideas from the public service in my time, particularly in the education space. And you just take it a step at a time, and people will start to notice and people start to see that you're bringing a very measured and careful approach to the way you govern. I mean, the real measurement of a government is a government that does not do harm to its own people. And by harm, I include over-regulation, over-intrusion in their private lives. I mean, I know that there would be a sizable number within Labor ranks who would love to ban fireworks. Mm-hmm. They just don't have the courage to do it, and they'd never get away with it.
Yep.
I mean, it is a fundamental territory expectation. I mean, you saw the fuss over, they tried to move it to the waterfront. Mm. Well, that immediately inhibited the number of people who could actually go and see it.
Yep.
Because of the parking. I mean, if they think we didn't notice that was a half-baked attempt to close down fireworks, you know, they're dreaming. So anyway, it's back at Little Mindle where it should be and should always be, and we should always have our fireworks.
But do you see it as an inevitable thing that will eventually be removed from Territory Life as the population grows and, you know, the regulation grows with it? Is that just something that we've just got to come to grips with?
No, I think a lot of people love coming up here because, you know, you have fireworks. I mean, I talk to newcomers all the time and it's always in the conversation.
Yep.
We weren't allowed to do this in Victoria or New South Wales.
Yep.
So I think there's a long way to go. I don't think in my lifetime will we see a ban on fireworks. And I mean, I can assure you, I'll be out on the front line defending the right. And look, I don't let off fireworks.
Yep.
Right? I don't go down on the beach. I live near Little Mindle.
But that doesn't mean you don't want other people to.
I want other people to enjoy it.
Yep.
I want them to teach their children how to be responsible around fireworks. I want people who think it's smart to tie a cracker to a dog's tail to be dealt with severely, you know, this sort of nonsense who spoils it for everybody.
Yep.
I'm one of these people who on Monday the 1st of July, I'll be on my balcony, I want to watch the fireworks.
Yep.
And they do such a good job.
Yep. You mentioned earlier you were the education minister, and I know you held a lot of other, you know, very important portfolios. What were some of your favourite portfolios you held during your time in territory politics?
I was, from the moment I arrived in 1990 to when I left in 99, I'd always held arts and ethnic affairs. And as Chief Minister, I kept those. So I love the ethnic diversity of the... I don't use the word multiculturalism, all right? I use the word ethnic diversity.
Okay.
And my fingerprints are on a lot of the facilities like the Columbian Brotherhood, the Cypriot Hall. I dug the foundations for the Filipino Community Hall, the Timor Chinese. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on. And that's a reflection of me growing up in Wodonga because we were near Bonagilla. And Bonagilla was the transit camp of Second World War. And so the whole Housing Commission estate was full of Greeks, Italians, and on top of that, my father was in charge of migrant education and he spoke 6 languages.
Wow.
So I grew up in this diversity of people, and this is a good example actually, people who made sausages in their garage, right? And I'm sure you've had that experience where the latest arrivals are slaughtering a pig or a goat and hanging it up in their garage or back shed. We used to do that here, but it was banned. Now, no one died.
Yeah.
Everyone made their small goods. It was all part of being a new Australian. And the other interesting aspect of this is my wife Josephine, her father came from Slovenia and mother from Croatia,
right.
Both Second World War, enforced migration. And my whole life had been imbued with all this ethnic diversity, and I just loved every minute of it. So that was a very special portfolio for me. The arts.
Yep.
Back when I first trained as a primary school teacher, I also trained as an arts teacher. So whilst my likes and dislikes in the art world are fairly narrow, I always tried to be a bit of a champion. But I guess for arts, the really exciting stuff was Asian relations and trade. Mm-hmm. Marshall Perrin appointed me the first Minister for Asian Relations and Trade, and off I went. Now, people probably don't know it even existed now because Labor abolished it. We used to have Trade Expo. Tens of thousands of people came here. So big was our Trade Expo once a year that they moved the Ministerial Council for Trade Ministers to the Northern Territory. That's all gone. So Leah, in her budget reply, she spoke about reinstating Asian Relations and Trade as a standalone outfit with its own minister.
Yep.
And, I mean, we were always the gateway to Asia.
Yep.
And we intend to put that back. I mean, people like Gareth Evans and Paul Keating used to say to me, I don't know what is with you blokes up there. You seem to be able to get meetings that we can't get. And that was true. I mean, I had a great connection, whether it was the Sultan of Brunei, the President of Indonesia, Prime Minister of Malaysia, the list just went on. And it worked for us. So people probably don't realise that anyone who had aspirations in the public service, whilst it wasn't mandatory, it was highly recommended you learn Indonesian. At one point, most of my cabinet spoke Indonesian. I mean, I was intensely proud as an Australian when I would go to Indonesia and I would see Suharto in my very imperfect, broken Indonesian. I could hold a conversation with him. He must have been a bit bemused because he was someone who spoke 6 languages, including German and Dutch. Us Australians are very insular when it comes to languages. But, there was a high-profile program for both Indonesian and Mandarin in territory schools. It's all gone.
Yeah, I used to study Indonesian in high school and primary school, actually.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it's still...
No, it's all gone.
Still going. But I just want to say one thing about Paul Keating. I think he said that Darwin was best viewed from 30,000 feet or something.
On his way to Paris.
Yeah, as you fly over. So I think that's the sort of contempt he might have held the North in. But anyway, I digress a bit. So you were Chief Minister from 95 to 99, is that right?
Yes, that's right.
I just wanted to read a couple of statistics that I found. So at the end of your Chief Ministership, the Territory had the lowest unemployment rate in Australia, the country's fastest rate of population growth, and we had multiple consecutive quarters of economic growth. What's happened since then?
I retired.
All right, next question.
No, look, I mean, we were the lead economy in Australia. This tiny little place at the top end of Australia. And I make no apologies for the fact that I was pretty aggressive in going out and hunting down projects. I mean, I got a number of hotels built along the front of the Esplanade.
Yep.
Our biggest contributor to gross state product was mining, and that was followed by tourism, which was a major employer. I took very seriously the view that the Territory government had to be a facilitator of economic growth. I mean, we have no manufacturing base. We're very small. So government needs to try and get involved. And look,
Can that be grown? Sorry to interrupt, but can the manufacturing base here be grown, or is it just a bridge too far?
no, it's contingent on population.
What about things like utility prices and that sort of thing as well?
Well, that drives manufacturing away because we're too expensive.
That's right.
Yeah.
But if you can control that cost or bring it down, does that sort of grease the wheels for?
Well, it does.
Yep.
All these things do, but you're not going to achieve it overnight. Now, the current Labor government, they've taken the view that they'll go out and they'll pick winners. Now, I'm not saying the CLP didn't try this tactic in the early years, but we soon worked out it doesn't work. Labor haven't worked out it doesn't work.
Sort of command economy type thing.
So they're still backing prawn farms that don't exist, and and bottled water. And I mean, I could go on. The list is quite damning, and in fact, they have this list of special projects which they bang on about. And someone was telling me, and I don't know how accurate this is, that there's something like 70 projects on it. You hear about a couple, but nothing happens. Again, it's a bit of a case of set it up, facilitate what you can without wasting public money, and get out of the way. And, I mean, we had lots of industry up here that just grew in the territory. I mean, the famous side tipper that Bernie Ostermeyer invented and created and was subsequently used by BHP and also transport pioneer Jim Cooper from Gulf Transport. These, with a little bit of help from government, got off the ground. And they were winners. Now, I don't think that side tipper is anywhere to be found in the Territory now. It's certainly not manufactured here anymore.
Yeah.
So, look, I don't doubt when people come into government, they try to do their best. Let's understand this.
So it's not malicious.
No, of course not. Whatever side of politics you come from, you come along with the right intentions. And regardless of what side you're from, you work hard. And you have many disappointments, and you have to put up with the public who, well, you mugs don't know what you're doing. And, oh, yeah, righto. In a small place like Darwin, you'd have these animated conversations when you went out to do your grocery shopping or fill up your car with petrol,
I'll bet.
Because, it's small. But, I mean, people try to do their best, but if your lived experience has been that you were a local school teacher or you were a salaried lawyer in the public service or, I mean, and I'm not disparaging any of those people, all right? But where is the lived experience of people who've actually done a capital raising, have actually launched a company off the ground successfully, sat on boards, as I did, across 3 continents. Mind you, that all came after politics. I said to my wife recently, I thought I knew quite a bit when I was elected Chief Minister, but I was 46, I think I was, and I'm now 74, so it was a long time ago. I said, now with all the lived experience I've had, I think I'm now ready to be Chief Minister. Except I'm not going to be Chief Minister.
I was going to say, is there a late charge?
No.
So, the Territory experienced a lot of their growth during your time in politics, actually during an extended period of federal Labor governments. Extended period was about 13 years, I believe. The rest of Australia was going through a recession.
True.
In the early 90s. But the Territory somehow managed to withstand that and continue to grow. How did the CLP government manage to do that?
Well, with a lot of hard work, and I'll say this for Keating. I mean, Keating was the one who taught me the difference between being in government and being in power.
Right.
It's a big difference.
Okay.
When you realise you're in power, you actually do stuff. And I found that, and Marshall found the same, Marshall Perrin found the same in dealing with him and Bob Hawke, that you could take an idea to them and they would actually be helpful.
Right.
And it was a good collaboration, but I mean, there hasn't been anyone like Paul Keating in the Labor Party since Paul Keating. I know someone described him in the Labor Party the other day as, he's just a fossil. Well, if he's a fossil, I'm a dinosaur. The reality is, he in many ways knew what he was doing.
Okay.
And their One Nation program, not be confused with Pauline Hanson,
right?
We got the MacArthur River Mine out of that. In fact, Paul and I opened it together. It was one of the first things I did as Chief Minister. He was very committed to major infrastructure projects, as I was.
Yep.
And if you could find that common ground, and Marshall Perrin found it with him as well.
Did Paul Keating have that lived experience you're talking about? Was he taking some sort of real world experience into his time as Prime Minister, or?
No, he came into Parliament at age 26.
Right. So,
He was a junior minister in the Whitlam government.
so how did he have that sort of more grounded view of things, do you think?
He was different. He was special,
Okay.
and he was an avid student of big projects, and he was rare.
Right.
I mean, he was seriously rare. And it was a great combination, him and Hawke, because Hawke had the lived experience through the union movement, which no one's had since. So, this current crop, I mean, have a good look at them. Prime Minister, the Treasurer, the Environment Minister, no, not Environment, whatever Bowen is.
Yeah, yep.
They've only ever worked for other politicians.
Right.
This is really, a very poor preparation for being in government and having your hands on the levers of government.
So, sorry, just to quickly just harp on that point, is the runway on the left into politics, has that changed? Are politicians on the left now just joining the party and then through that becoming prominent in Australian politics on the left, as opposed to having owning businesses and then moving into politics that way, or
No, you're absolutely right. In fact, I could run through the Hawke and Keating ministries and point out where many of those people came from, and it wasn't from working for another Labor politician. But the coalitioners tended to go down the same path. So, it's not just one side. Sure. But when I was asked to come back and stand CLP presidency yet again, last time, I went out of my way to look for candidates that we could run who had fair dinkum lived experience. Because the CLP had lapsed into this, only put up the old tied CLP members who've been forever trying to have a go, and God love them. I mean, they've done all the heavy lifting. We owe them a lot. But I didn't care whether you weren't even a member of the CLP. I wanted what was best for the territory, not for the CLP, for the territory. And so this crop of candidates we have today is, in my view, in my assessment, the most spectacular group of candidates we have seen in 20, 30 years. I mean, we got people who are senior health professionals. You had on this program Tanzil Raman,
Yep.
who's a demographer, population expert.
Yep.
All the way from Karama to Oxford and back. He was a member of the Labor Party, but they weren't listening to him.
Yep.
So, I wanted to give him a run. I didn't know where he'd get a run. I mean, a number of it applied for different seats all around the place. But, take Robin Carl, who ended up in Port Darwin. I mean, she was the CEO of the private hospital here in Darwin, as well later as the CEO of the Palmerston Super Clinic. And, you know, she's not a young woman, but she has a great depth of experience in running health issues. I love the fact that out at Casuarina, our candidate out there is the Donut King, but he got his degree in Cyprus, so he speaks perfect Greek.
Right.
So he has an immediate connection with the... He'd never been a member of the CLP. The lady out in Karama, Ollie Carlson, never a member of CLP. But they all said the same thing, as did our candidate in Fanny Bay, Laurie, Zio, who said... And she actually worked on the 5th floor for a Labor minister, and left and said, these people don't know what they're doing. And so I've decided to give it a crack, and I'm sorry, I'm not a member of the CLP, but I'd like to have a go. Step right up. So I'm sure we missed some really good candidates in the process, but what's really good is that we've now got a federal election coming up, and we've now got a collection of outstanding candidates who might like to consider a shot at a federal seat, which I believe we can win in Solomon.
Okay. So it's a pretty diverse bunch of candidates you've got. Was that done on purpose? Or
It was.
It was? Yep.
It was.
Yep. So
Worked out beautifully. I mean, we didn't have an Indian quota or a Chinese quota. The candidates that we have today for the CLP reflect the cultural diversity of the territory.
Right.
And that hasn't been the case for a long time.
Okay. But it's also done on meritocracy as well?
It's done on the merits.
Yep, great. So you found yourself back as the president of the CLP. You've been here a couple of times before, excuse me. What can we expect from a Shane Stone presidency this time?
Well,
is there anything different?
Well, I certainly want to win, and I want the parliamentary team to win, and I want them to approach the task of government in a sensible way. So I think I can give some good guidance here. I think one of the problems which had happened in the past, where the CLP got back for only one term and it ended up a disaster, there was no senior people around who could say, well, hang on, that's not how this works, all right? And so people ask me the question, well, let's say the CLP win, are you out of here? No, I'm not.
Okay.
I'm around.
Great.
And I'll continue to support and encourage. I've had a big input into the policy framework that's currently being rolled out to Territorians. I mean, top issue, cost of living. Crime is the top issue, but I can tell you, cost of living, people are struggling to put food on the table. And I never thought I'd say that about anywhere in Australia. But that is happening now. And if you look around governments and they've got charges for this and charges for that, and they completely lost control of the power debate. I mean, these headlines coming out of Victoria say, well, Victoria will run out of gas next year, which means that they won't be able to turn the lights on. I mean, are we serious? Is this really happening? I mean, and are we sort of just going to blindly walk into it and then someone will say, whoa, you know, we've got to do something about this. Well, it's too late.
And for a country with an ocean of gas under its feet as well.
Well, it's not just gas, it's coal. I mean, I get the argument about coal. I'm not a climate change denialist, all right? I accept the climate's always changing. It has been since the caveman first stepped out of the cave, all right? The debate is about what do you do about it, all right? And it may be that in time that coal is out the door and there's a transition with gas, and then we do end up with renewables in 50, 60 years' time. But if anyone believes they're going to be able to run the system of power across all states and territories in Australia based on windmills and solar panels, they're in for a shock.
So is the antidote to that nuclear? And I mean, this might open Pandora's box here a little bit, but it seems like Dutton and Littleproud and these guys are very much putting nuclear back on the conservative agenda. Is that the antidote to all this?
I don't think there is a magic bullet, but everything should be in the discussion.
Absolutely.
I don't care whether it's water wheels, nuclear, gas. Why is it that we can't have a sensible discussion about all the options? And we may well decide that we don't want to go down the nuclear route, but at least let's have an informed discussion about it.
Well, that was wasn't that a John Howard moratorium he put on there? Was that, if I remember correctly?
Well, it was Hawke who got us back to 3-mine policy.
Okay.
He started it.
Right.
And Howard was never very warm on it. But then again, the Australian public weren't. I mean, they believed all the stuff about Hiroshima and
Chernobyl
and all that. And I do understand how people are spooked.
Yep.
But hey, it's a different world, different imperatives, different pressure points. Need to have the discussion.
Yep.
What is wrong with the discussion?
What was your relationship with John Howard like during your time as the federal
President?
Yeah.
6 years, it was excellent. I saw him last weekend in Sydney.
Okay.
I went down for the anniversary of the Liberal Party, since as a former federal president and one of the few life members of the Liberal Party. I'm not sure how that accords with the rules when you're a member of the CLP, which is not the Liberal Party.
Yep.
But I had a 48-hour flying visit. I didn't want to miss it, so my wife and I went down for it. I mean, he's 84. He delivers this speech, the main speech of the conference dinner, without a sheet of paper. The guy he's got it, But politics is a funny business. I mean, the old saying that there were 7 days between Palm Sunday and the crucifixion. I mean, this was probably the most successful Prime Minister we'd had, up there with Hawke and Howard and Menzies. And they not only threw out his government, they threw him out of his seat. So, the public can be quite... Fickle. Yeah, they are. And the reality is, I mean, if you're out on the street with John now, people mob him as though, no, that didn't happen. Well, it did actually. But and there was a great humiliation for a bloke who didn't deserve to be humiliated like that.
Right.
But look, he's got on with life.
Yep.
Politics is full of disappointments. I left in 99, retired. I was 49 because I promised my wife I wouldn't stay in Parliament longer than 3 terms. And she reminded me, and I kept my word. I think that too many people hang around for all the wrong reasons.
Right.
But anyway, I got going and I went on to a very interesting career, sitting on boards across 3 continents, got involved in a lot of not-for-profit stuff. The Duke of Edinburgh Award, which I served as the national chairman of. I'm on the Stockman Hall of Fame in Longreach these days.
Yep.
And I remain very active there. So I was finally free to go and do stuff that I thought when you're 49 you can see another career.
Yep.
And in fact, I got to about 68 and had retired when Prime Minister Scott Morrison brought me back to head up the National Recovery and Resilience Agency. So I became the disaster czar for Australia, which I did for 3.5 years until Albanese fired me. My sin was to say that people shouldn't build on riverbanks.
Right, okay.
So I noticed that he was saying it a month later. But look, in 3.5 years I'd done, I think it was 150 disasters, and I was wrung out. I was exhausted because in my role you were the first person there. You would greet them as they were coming out of the Lismore floods, and all they had on was a pair of shorts, not even a set of thongs, nothing. And you got to hold them. very tough.
Just going back to territory politics, if I may, I think I've heard you say before that leaders like Everingham and Perrin always seem to have a pipeline of infrastructure that they could hand over to the next chief.
Yep.
Is that the sort of approach that you want to instill in a CLP government should you win power in August? Is that an ideological sort of thing that you'd like to culture?
Yeah, look, there must be a handing over of the baton with good projects. And look, good projects don't just happen overnight. I mean, I mentioned before the opening of the MacArthur River mine, which Paul Keating and I did. I'd only been Chief Minister 1 week. All the heavy lifting over 6 years had been done by Marshall Perrin, my predecessor.
Right.
But he and Barry Coulter had done the job. Shane Stone simply stood up there and took the accolades. But, I left behind a good pipeline of projects for my successor. Unfortunately, these things have been lost along the way. I think generally Labor people find that the Martin government basically didn't do much. And I guess it's irresistible for a political party to stray from the proposition that the first job of a newly elected government is to make sure you get elected for a second term.
Right.
And some take that very seriously, as they should. But in the background, you should be working on projects. What can we get going? What can we get up? And I don't want to get too much into it because it gives an insight into what I think they should be doing once they're in there.
Yep.
But you got to have plans. You got to be bold. You got to be courageous. And not everything's going to come off. But you got to give it your best shot. And hopefully you'll end up where I did. There was a crane on every bloody street corner in Darwin in my day. The economy was booming. As you pointed out, it was the lowest unemployment in Australia. So these things are achievable, but there's a lot of stuff in between you got to do to make it right. And the big challenge for major projects remains the cost of power. And I think we don't know the whole story yet, but I think we're going to discover there's it's a horror show when we get in, and if we get in, if these Territorians decide to trust us to be the government, I just don't know where Power and Water Authority or TGen or whatever they call themselves these days, just where they're at.
Is it fixable?
All things are fixable, particularly when you're the government. So, but what you don't want to do is come in and hit people with big charges and, start sacking people. I mean, Lee's made it very clear. There is no plan to sack heaps of public servants. I was Minister for Public Employment. Something I discovered, you don't have to sack anyone. The attrition rate is through the roof.
Yep.
I mean, it's the same federally. It's the churn. So it works its way out. And my sense of talking to many public servants is that they don't fear the CLP. They just want to be assured that they can be part of the rebuilding of the territory, that they will be given meaningful roles to help a new government find its way.
Do you have trust in the public service that should a CLP government win power in August, that 20 of the last 23 years of Labor power, potentially there's a few entrenched public servants in there? Do you have that sort of trust in the public service that if you win power, they will be, I forget the terminology, but they'll be supportive of your cause to develop the territory? I asked the same sort of question of Claire Martin, coming in from 27 years of CLP governance, and she said the public service were fantastic. They helped her at every turn. Do you sort of see the same thing?
I expect the same.
Okay.
Look, most public servants are not interested in politics.
Yep.
A lot of the mandarins will have a political colour to them. I mean, in my day, I had 3 department secretaries, all of whom were aligned with the Labor Party. I employed Dennis Bree, even after he'd gone out and run the 97 election, and I brought him back in to Department of Transport and Works, I think it was, at a senior level.
Yep.
I just find that most public servants are dedicated, hard-working Territorians who have the same pressures as everybody else, and they just want to do their job.
Some people might see your, or I'll say some detractors might see your reappointment to the presidency as maybe a step back in time, maybe a return to the CLP Boys Club, as the NT News used to like to say it, I think. What do you say to those people?
Well, it's really quite simple. Judge me by what I do, not by what I say.
Okay.
And I think anyone who's been watching the way I've been operating, particularly around the pre-selections and formulation of policy, would say, well, you know, he's recognised it's a different era out there, and it is. I mean, campaigns are very different now. If you expect to just see lots of political ads on TV, you're going to be disappointed, because that's not how it's done these days. There's a lot of social media stuff.
Yep.
There's this sort of medium in which people are tuning into. So, I mean, I knew there was going to be a reaction, but, I mean, my detractors, who are they? Well, they're on the other team. Of course they're going to say something.
Yeah.
I think they were deeply concerned and upset when I came back.
Right. Is that because they're worried about what you bring to the table? You know, that were undefeated in your time in politics? Why would they be feeling that way?
There's a bit of that, but they also know that I now bring a breadth of experience over decades that helps prepare the people who will actually be the government. I won't be the government. I'm not standing for a seat. You know, unlike the Labor Party, who used to be able to dictate to their parliamentary caucus how to vote and what to support, the CLP doesn't do that. We work in collaboration. We come up with policies. The parliamentary wing comes up with policies. We don't always agree, but we find a way forward.
Yep.
So, you know.
Well, following, I guess you could say, the instability of the Mills-Giles governments from 2012 to 2016, you know, what assurances can you give Territorians that type of thing is going to be different now under new leadership?
Well, none of those people are involved anymore. They're all gone.
Yep.
And it was quite a time ago. What are we talking, 8, 10 years ago? I mean...
Give or take, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I say to people who do want to talk to me about it, I say, well, you know, move on. We've all moved on. I mean, my advice was shunned and rejected, and I remember one senior minister saying that my problem was I lacked relevance deprivation syndrome. Really? As though I didn't have enough to do with my life? Just trying to be helpful.
Yep.
So I had no influence or no involvement in that time. I think it's pretty sad the way it worked out, but that's so far back in the future. No one should be judging Leah Whanakauara and her team through that prism.
Yep. Crime and the economy seem to be the two main issues going into this election. But just aside from that, do you see any other sort of hot button issues that are relevant to voters that the CLP is going to be focusing on? Look,
the community is consumed with the crime issue. It is huge. It's come off a little bit, but you know, I think it might have been 46%. It's down to 42%. I mean, it's still about 40%. Cost of living, and the cost of living they attribute both directly and indirectly to this government. So, and look, just doing lots of giveaways, as we've now discovered, you know, trying to buy people's votes. giving public servants a bonus, just before the election. I mean, people see this for what it is. And the reality is that the money has to be paid back. What are we at, 13 billion? Effectively next year, 15 billion.
Yep.
On a population of, what are we, 240,000?
Yeah, on a good day.
On a good day? I mean, 1,000 million makes $1 billion. I mean, seriously?
Yeah.
I will say this for Claire Martin and Sid Sterling. The penny dropped with them, and they were starting to address this massive runaway debt when they were both deposed. And thereafter, there was no serious attempt. And I think the thing that really should worry people is how much interest a day we're paying as Territorians to service this debt. It's in the millions.
Yep.
And that's millions we're not spending on schools, hospitals, roads.
Yep.
Scary stuff.
Yep. So we're under 60 days now to the election. So the whips are cracking. How's the campaign going? Are all the candidates behaving themselves? Are they all getting out there and pounding the pavement and doing all the things that they should be doing? And how's it going?
Well, I suspect that our management, our 25 candidates, probably mirrors the Labor Party's management of their 25 candidates. I mean, look, it takes a lot of courage to be a political candidate, wherever you come from.
Yep, you're pretty exposed, aren't you?
Yeah, and a lot of people say, "Yeah, well, didn't know it was going to be like this," and it's lonely. You're out there at bloody 6 o'clock waving those cornflakes as the traffic go past.
Yeah,
you're on the doorstep. You're braving the dogs. You're braving people who are not interested, and it's, I'm not interested, mate. Go away. Like it's a hardcore to be, a political candidate. So I take my hat off to all of them. Is it a runaway success? No, it's not. It's very close.
Okay.
Very, very close. So, I mean, you've had 3 chief ministers in one term. You've got the next one waiting in the sidelines, JC Page. He's the Deputy Chief Minister. He'd be the next one in.
Yep.
So people should think about that. And you've got to ask yourself the question, if it turned out that you got a minority Labor government and there were a few surprise defeats on the Labor side, and
do you mean by independents or Greens, or is that what you're talking about?
Well, it could be a real mix.
Yep.
All right? Because there are people who genuinely believe that the answer to all our sins and failings are independence. And, I mean, seriously? You want people with even less lived experience, independents who flop over the line on preference deals. And that's our democracy. That's how it works. And then you've got to try and negotiate, how you govern. I mean, I'm sure Anthony Albanese, you lie awake at night thinking about a minority Labor government with a coalition of Teals and Greens. Now, I don't even think that's worth doing, because you're just going to tear your hair out. They're going to pull in 50 different directions.
Yep.
I can say to people that the Greens and Independents and Teals don't deliver a consistency in government. They just don't.
Yeah.
And they prove that.
So I think the bookies have got the CLP at about $1.55 to elect the next chief minister. I think Labor's at about $2.50 now. Do you read anything into those sort of, because that's almost as independent as you can get? People voting with their dollars. Cost of living, is tight at the moment, so people are probably very selective of where they put their money. Do you read anything into the polling?
Well,
to use that term loosely.
The bookies don't always get it right.
No.
We saw that with Shorten being defeated by Morrison.
Yep. Trump 2016.
Yeah, Trump 2016.
Yep.
And what I thought was funny was they always started paying out early. They're paying out on the wrong result. Look, when this all started, when I got back to Darwin in August last year, because we've always kept our home here, so it was easy to, I had somewhere to move back to. It wasn't the case. We were the outsiders. So, yes, the money has moved. I think the other big thing to watch is you'll see the next lot of published donations coming out from the Northern Territory Electoral Commission.
Okay.
I think they come after the 8th of August,
Right.
8th of July.
Okay.
And I suspect that we will be out fundraising Labor 2-1. And that includes a lot of pensioners, ordinary workers, just want to give something to get rid of this government.
So it's not from a sort of couple of large
No,
donors. It's sort of grassrootsy.
Grassroots.
Yep.
And there's very few corporates in there.
Right.
It's a lot of ordinary people who say, please, we just have to be rid of this government. I mean, I said to a real strong Labor guy the other day, I said, you guys need to have a clean out of the Aegean stables, hose them out so that you can have another crack at getting a quality team like the CLP's come up with. And he said, we're talking about exactly that. Exactly that.
Right.
And you see that from time to time where a political party says, look, the only way to renew and refresh is to have the clean out. I mean, that's the democracy. I mean, the great thing about this country that we live in, that we call home, Australia, is governments change here without a shot being fired. Now, how many countries can make that claim?
Mm.
But it also means that you can have friends on the other side of politics.
Yep.
You can go and have coffee with your political opponents, and if you win, great. If you lose, it's a bit like the grand final. See you next year.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a good attitude that Australians have got to their political contests, and I hope it always remains so. We don't have riots, we don't have troops or police out on the street quelling the losers.
Mm.
That's not the Australian way.
Are we apathetic then, do you think, or is that just a different way of looking at things?
Indifferent.
Indifferent. Okay. So you say it's going to be. You think it's going to be tight. Can you win? Is the most important question.
Yes, we can.
And can you return a majority government?
I believe that we can win, and we can win a majority. I don't believe it'll be some big thumping majority,
Okay.
but I do believe that we can win, and it's what we then do with that matters. And people, of accepting the fact that they're part of a team. Look, the reality is when people come into government, everyone wants to be a minister, and you would encourage that.
Mm-hmm.
You want people who are aspirational. You want people with a bit of ambition. But it's how you go about it that matters.
Okay. We'll move on from politics for a second. I think more broadly, how do you think the territory is placed as it currently stands going forward? That could be economically, socially, culturally. What's the health of the territory as you see it?
Pretty poor at the moment. I think that we, and you pick it up in letters to the editor and other commentary and social media and feedback on text messages into Katie Wolf and all the rest. There's too many people who believe we are a broken state.
Mm-hmm.
And there are too many Territorians who want to entertain the prospect of the Commonwealth stepping in and taking over control of the territory. Now, I'm very disappointed in that. I mean, no matter how bad things might be, to be in charge of our own destiny, running our own affairs, all right, is got to be better than having some bureaucratic arrangements with Canberra.
Mm-hmm.
And they're a long way away, and I can tell you, I've been there. I've been a secretary down there. I was there for 3.5 years. Unless you're in Melbourne, Sydney or Canberra, you don't exist. All right?
So is that a step back in time for Territorians?
Absolutely.
What are the implications there for, say, worst case scenario was to be handed back to the Commonwealth? What's your everyday Territorian facing in that sense?
Well, their lives would be subsumed by the Australian Public Service.
Right.
people should think about that.
Yeah. But why would that be, a bad thing?
Well, anyone who's dealt with the APS from far away
Yep.
can tell you their own stories. I mean, at least, even if it's a bad government up here, you got some sense of being able to access services and have some say.
Yep.
I mean, as someone said, the worst, and I won't name who said it, but he said, better to have the worst government in the territory run the place than the best government in Canberra.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some merit in that proposition.
Yep.
But the thing is, we now have an opportunity to change that come August, only 2 months away.
Yep.
And it's time for a change, and I believe Territorians are going to seize it with both hands.
There's a perception that the Labor Party has maybe done more for rural and remote Territorians than the CLP has in recent times. Do you subscribe to that fact? Is that something that rings true, or is that?
I don't know how you measure that. I mean, if standing next to a federal minister who's just come up and committed $400 million to a housing program in a remote community is somehow your victory when it's not, then that doesn't ring true.
But what about infrastructure? The roads are pretty ordinary at the moment. Like if you getting to and from a cattle station, the highways aren't in great nick after the weather we've had last year. Does that sort of resonate?
Well, it resonates with me, and I'm someone who has, I don't do it all the time, but in the last 18 months, I've probably driven 3 times from here to Brisbane.
Yep.
Because I enjoy the drive, and I've watched the roads just deteriorate to such an extent that, I mean, someone said to me recently, we should bring back the Cannonball Run. Well, I said, you couldn't. The roads are not up to it.
Yeah.
Have you been out there? If you're wondering why, you've got empty shelves in supermarkets, why the food is not what it should be, they can't get the trucks through. So that's going to be one of the big challenges for the CLP, to get stuck back into this infrastructure.
Yep, and that's going to be a big focus, is it?
Should be.
Yep. All right. Statehood. So you were involved in the 1998 referendum.
Yep. Listed by 0.5%.
Just defeated. Do you think the lessons from those past failed referendums, as well as the ones that have won, do you think that they were ignored during the recent Voice referendum? Failure to draft legislation, that sort of thing. Is that?
I think there was a lot of parallels between the Voice referendum and the statehood referendum.
Okay.
And I tried to have that conversation with some people who were very pro the Voice. It's going to fail for these reasons. Now, the level of failure I was surprised at.
Okay.
It wasn't just like it was 60-40 or something,
Yeah.
It was massive. But I don't believe if you went to Territorians with a referendum for statehood tomorrow, they wouldn't vote for it.
So is that something you're not going to be taking?
It doesn't even get a look in any of the research. No one's interested.
Why is that?
Just not interested. Don't see it as a driving issue at all.
But wouldn't it give more autonomy to Territorians in a lot of respects? Would it improve our lives?
Well, we still get the same monies. Nothing changes, and that was the case back then.
Yep.
It wouldn't give us any more representatives.
Yep.
Because of population.
So what was the point back then?
Good question. Good question. Well, it was something that, we were, the CLP were the government or the party for self-government, and we delivered that.
Yep.
Labor totally opposed self-government.
Okay.
Understand this. This is our history. When it came to statehood, it was a mixed bag of people who wanted all sorts of things, whether it was designated Aboriginal seats or vetoes. There was no way you could build the consensus, and you won't build it today.
Right.
Perhaps it's a little bit quirky, but I think Territorians just say, no, we're the territory. Leave it alone.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah.
Did Jacinta Nampijinpa Price and Warren Mundine, did they serve up a bit of a lesson in politics to the left in the recent referendum?
Well, they did a great job, the two of them, and I'm not sure that the left or Labor Party have taken the lessons.
Yeah.
I think they're still in denial. And look, the reality is that I think most Australians would agree that we don't have a really flash, situation in Australia in terms of us and our Indigenous people.
Mm-hmm.
The debate is what you do about it. And whether it's a voice or whether it is actually to better empower Aboriginal communities, like we're proposing to do with local government, for those who want to go back to local government in Aboriginal communities. Lee has made it very clear that people will have choice. I was staggered at the number of Indigenous people who were opposed to it because they just saw it as an attempt by the land councils to subsume their lives. And a lot of these Aboriginal organisations have been at war with the land councils for a long time. So, look, how many Indigenous people have we actually got in the parliament now up here?
I think is there actually an overrepresentation in terms of the statistical?
There probably is, but that doesn't matter.
Yep.
The fact is that you're seeing Indigenous people being elected to the parliament.
Yep.
Now, there's no better voice than that. So, and they're not all of the same political colour.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the member for Mulca is a fierce independent who actually defeated the deputy leader of the Labor Party 2 elections ago.
Yep.
So, and the CLP, they had their own black caucus at one point. I think that there's always been a bit of a different attitude up here. I mean, you go down to Sydney, most of those people have never seen a real Aboriginal. Whereas up here, we mix socially, we play sport, we're totally intertwined in our lives.
Yep.
You can't say that about too many places in Australia.
No, but does the voice come out of a feeling that the current system, whether there is Indigenous representation in Parliament or not, come out of a feeling that the system is failing them and more needs to be done outside of the existing process?
Well, I think the voice was driven by people who were a bit disconnected from what people on the ground really wanted.
Okay.
And they saw it for that.
Yep.
They did not want bureaucrats out of Canberra dictating to them through a voice
Yep.
what should or shouldn't happen. I mean, I'd spent some time up in the Torres Strait and they were ferocious on this, saying, get out of our lives.
Mm-hmm.
We do good stuff up here, and they do. So I do understand the hesitation.
Yeah. So what's the in terms of the machinery of what the CLP is then offering, in terms of, in opposition of the voice, come this August?
Well, the point is, the first thing that we detected
Yep.
was that many of these Aboriginal communities wanted out of this community government system. They say, if we're down the middle of nowhere, then the office for the community government is in Katherine or Darwin.
Yep.
It's a long way from where we are. So they want to unravel that. Now, not all of them do, and the Local Government Association of the Northern Territory were fiercely opposed to it. But instead of being fiercely opposed to it, they should ask their members, well, what do you want? And that should be the guiding.
Paramount.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, that probably covers a lot of what I've wanted to ask you, Shane. So thank you very much for your time. We usually give our guests an opportunity at the end of each podcast to just promote whatever they've going on. I don't know if you wanted to have a final sort of word to the constituency, but the floor is yours.
Well, the first thing I'd like to do is acknowledge and thank Territorians for having given me a career in politics. That's paramount. I mean, everything I've gone on and achieved in life started in the Territory and the CLP. So for that, I'm enormously grateful. He didn't have to always agree with me, but, you know, those results in that 97 election spoke volumes.
Yep.
The second thing is that there is no doubt, although we, in my era, had achieved 27 years of continuous government, that is never good, because it means that you've got an opposition who never get a crack and never get a chance. And of course, when they do come in, they're at times ill-prepared. And so I think what we're embarking upon here is this is a whole new era in territory politics where both sides have an opportunity. And this time there's an opportunity for a CLP government led by Leah Finocchiaro. And I think Labor's had 20 years. As I said about our 27 years, 20 years, not good.
Yep.
All right, roll it around, give everyone a shot.
Yep.
And this time round, Leah can do the job and her team can do the job. And thank you for inviting me onto the podcast.
You're very welcome. The Territory thanks for you for your service over the years, and best of luck in August.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Shane. Thanks, everyone.